was a seeker. He wanted to find a solution to the problem of human existence. And I suppose that in that sense we're all seekers, aren't we? Of course, we do not define our quest in such lofty terms. But ultimately, what we're after is the final solution to the riddle of our private existence. There are many stories about Buddha, and you may know more of them than I do, but let us cut through all that the devotion and the imagination and the inspired response of millions of human beings have given to this creative and moving spirit who seemed in himself to be so completely one with what he claims to have found, that when his worshippers contemplate his life, they think of him as the only God worthy of worship. He wanted to know the answer to human suffering. Everywhere he looked around him in the world, he saw men who were suffering. Young people were getting older, old people were getting older. No man escaped old age if he continued to live. And old age brought with it the disintegration of powers of body and mind. And it seemed, as contrasted with the glory and the wonder and the beauty of youth, to be tragedy. He saw around him men who were hungry and who could find no food to eat. And the living of their lives on the basis of the provisions that were available to them seemed to him, and perhaps to them, to be an increasing nightmare without reason and without tenderness. He saw people dying. One by one the duties end, one by one the lights go out. The tallest mountain must crumble, the strongest beam must break. The wisest man withers like a plant. Death everywhere, riding on all the winds. What is there about the nature of human existence that makes of all of life a breeding ground for anguish of spirit? That was his problem. He set out to find it. If I can get rid of my flesh, if I can get rid of the persistent demands of my body, if somehow I can detach myself from my space-time involvement, then I can be free of this thing, because that which is responsible for all of the suffering of life, and therefore that which is responsible for life itself, for in his thinking it seemed that life and suffering were synonymous. And here he broke with the Brahmanic mystics, for the Brahmanic mystics recognized that life was made up of that which was good and that which is evil, that life is a combination of the negative and the positive, of joy and sorrow, of hope and despair. And therefore the devout Brahma felt that if he could, by ecstasy, lift himself above the conflict, then he would be beyond good and evil. And only those who were not able to do that would be caught in the agonizing grapple of the tensions between good and evil. But for Gautama, life is evil because life has desire. Life means desire. And it is of the nature of desire that it can never be fulfilled. Very interesting, isn't it? When I got there, I said, well, the thing that I want, I'll find, yeah. But when I got there, it wasn't there. It was somewhere else. And then when I got to that other place that I had located, then it wasn't there. Yet all experience is an arch where through gleams that untraveled world, whose margin fades forever and forever when I move. I said when I got there that the fight would be over, but when I got there I found that the fight was not over, that the fight would never be over, no, not even in death. Isn't that human experience? That's what he says in a way. Inasmuch as it is true in his thinking that you cannot fulfill desire, then desire must be attacked in a more fundamental manner. Desire must be rooted out. But you cannot root out desire unless somehow you are able to destroy in the human spirit the will to live. And the will to live is intimately a part of the love of life. One of his disciples said to him, and he was talking about nirvana and how nirvana is bliss, and he said, but if nirvana is bliss, then that means that you're feeling something, you are enjoying something. And he said, no, nirvana is bliss because it is bliss to be rid completely of all desire. Now, let's look at this. The root of human suffering is desire. Desire is rooted, grounded in the life process itself. The end of all of life in terms of its most significance is to arrive at a point where significance is irrelevant, to arrive at a point that is beyond significance, beyond feeling, beyond desire. In Washington, D.C., in the old part of the Rock Creek Cemetery, there is a statue built by St. Gordon, a statue built as a memorial to the wife of Henry Adams. you may remember that in one of the Galsworthy novels published after his death, there's a long description of this member of the Forsyth saga, the Forsyth family, who lands in Washington, and he sits in front of this statue and makes a very important discovery about the meaning of human existence. Well, I very often during the years that I lived in Washington, I would go out to Rock Creek Cemetery, and every visitor who came to preach in the University Chapel, I arranged to take him out there sometimes before the service, because it was very helpful in many ways. There is a woman seated in a chair. Her body is draped with a huge bit of greenish bronze coming over her face and covering everything except a hand. The hand is, her cheek is resting on the hand, the elbow is leaning on the arm of the seat, and she's looking straight ahead. And as you look at her, you see that every tear that was in her has been cried out. That there is nothing left that can register awareness that she is beyond all tension, beyond all struggle, beyond all the contradictions of life, and she's landed out there somewhere, and they call that statue Nirvana. Now, the meaning of what Buddha found after going through all the meaning of what Buddha found after going through all of the varied experiences of life, after starving himself to death, almost to death, after doing running the whole gamut of flagellation and the reduction of the self, he found that he couldn't do it that way, that he couldn't even by thinking it through do it. He couldn't by meditating do it. The only thing that he could do was, well, he didn't know. It's very interesting. He didn't know. He didn't know what he could do. He could wait. This is very interesting now. He could wait. He had done everything. He could wait and see if he could get still enough inside but not the stillness of no activity altogether, and yet it seems as if that is what he was trying to say. But it is more like the stillness of absolute motion. a stillness that is so utterly dynamic that it isn't activity at all. It's very interesting. I can't put it into words, but when this happened to him, then he had the illumination. And what was the illumination? And see, I'm trying to talk about it from the outside with my mind, and I can't do it. The illumination, whatever the illumination was, it freed him of all of the necessities of existence. He preached about it afterwards, for suddenly it seemed to him that he had arrived at a place at which it was up to him to go forward, to come back and pick up life or go on beyond. But not go on beyond as Buddha, but go on beyond the self and the limitations of the self. Now, naturally, when he had that experience, he had to give a blueprint. His disciples wanted to know, how do you do it? And he wanted to share it. So we get a lot of instructions, techniques, the Eightfold Path, right speech, right thinking, right living, right meditation, so forth and so on. But it is quite possible to follow all of the steps of the Eightfold Path and not get it. Now, what is the bearing of all of this in his life in terms of his ethic and the crucial problem of the masses of people? For that, it is at that point that we are concerned. You remember, and I'll have to take an extra minute this morning, you remember when we were discussing the whole doctrine of reincarnation and the insistence that the soul became involved in the deeds that we do, and the deeds affected the quality of the soul, and therefore the soul had to get its purification, and if it meant coming back again and again and again and again, because the theory of time upon which we were operating is a circular theory of time. You cannot be free until you are free of the necessity even of being yourself. And it's so difficult for us in our culture and civilization to grapple with that, because all of our emphasis is upon self-realization, of coming to oneself. What we are all striving to do sometime is to say, with reference to something, I did it. I did it. And a whole school of psychologists developed around the idea of the necessity for taking personal responsibility for your individual actions. The self, coming to oneself, and defined in all these various ways. But here, is the reverse of that. Buddha insists that the self has no enduring value or significance. That the only thing that endures is the event, the act, and its result. Long before John Watson worked on behaviorism at Johns Hopkins University, here's behaviorism. Hundreds of years before, what is it that counts? The deed. And each deed carries its own value, its own merit, its own judgment, its own logic. The self is not important in terms of the effect of the deed on the self. So that when one dies, in my imagination, when I read this is the way it seems to be, that when one dies, one goes through a sort of opening, a little place like that, just big enough for the self to get through, but not big enough for all these events to get through. So they are left outside as you leave your clothes outside. But when you go in, whatever in is, you find that you didn't do your work well, and you must come back. There's only one way that you can come back, and that's right back through that same place and pick up what you left at the door. And the only way that you can get rid of that is to finally to arrive at a place that there's nothing left at the door, and then you're free. The event. Now you see what that means in terms of human history. It's an amazing thing that all of human life is involved in the operation of law, the operation of logic, the operation of antecedent, consequence, reaping, sowing. And there is no provision made for any creative operation upon the logic of events. If I want to alter the history of the world, there is only one way by which it can be altered in this pattern of thought, and that is to alter the events which in turn will influence the consequences. It's interesting because an aspect of this appears in the thought of Jesus. You remember? He pictures the end of human history when all the people of the world will come before the great judgment. And what is interesting about the judgment is not the judge and what he has to say. Sheep on the right, goats on the left. But what determines whether you are a sheep or a goat? The judge? No. The event. The event. I was sick, and you didn't come to see me. I was in prison, you didn't visit me, and so forth and so on. The event. The history of the individual's life became his judgment. Now, long before Jesus of Nazareth appears, here is a man wrestling with that same problem. It is not a complete answer. It is not a complete answer, and I don't have time now to deal with it. because it makes of all of life a mechanical, materialistic operation. And it confines the activities of the human spirit within the starkest kind of determinism. And I don't think that life is like that altogether. I think there's always a margin in which it is possible for the creative human spirit to elect an alternative that violates even the logic of events. One man with one mind can stand over against the logic even of human history and hold his creative power at dead center over this logical stuff until a new law moves out of him and invades the stuff of human history. And that's why I think life is good rather than evil, because it has that possibility. Now I know I should stop. But if you just bear with me for 2 more minutes and a half or 3. I'm concerned at one more step here about the ethic that's involved in this. You remember? Oh, no, you don't. But when we talked about the Zionists, I said that they did not project this doctrine of ahimsa about which Mahatma Gandhi talks so much, because they wanted to do something positive. They said, "Thou shalt not kill," not because of the respect that they had for the life that would be destroyed, but "thou shalt not kill," because if I kill, then I defile myself. And it is because I do not wish to become contaminated that I will not kill you. Not because I love you or don't love you, but I don't want to get dirty, so I will not kill you. It's very nice of me. Now, the ethic that is the derivative from the discovery of Buddha is this. It is the ethic of self-purification, which is the next creative step from this position that the Zionists disclose. Self-purification. I get rid of desire, and ridding myself of desire through these processes that are familiar to the Buddhists, I purify myself. But now this is the wonderfully glorious thing about his insight. He discovered that if an individual becomes sufficiently pure in his life, that the purity of his life radiates automatically, without the movement of his will even. The purity of his life radiates a quality that is moral in character, that affects the lives of other people. And by so doing, you see, he introduces a life-affirming concept into a position which basically is life-denying. For you see, if I get rid of the self and so forth, and self-purification, that's withdrawal, that's life-denying, that is not life-affirming. And the logic of that position, you see, is to withdraw. Come in touch with that radiation, find themselves affected by the quality of my purity. Therefore, he said, the responsibility of the individual becomes a double responsibility. I will purify myself that I may get from under the necessities of existence. But in the purification of myself, I recognize to radiate a quality of living that will influence the minds, the thinking, and the processes of the people around me. And his great contribution to ethics is at that point that he defines direct action in terms that have to do with the inner purity of the life. And after all these centuries, we still do not dare try the thing that he suggested, to make an attack on moral disorder in the world by the purification of one's own life, on the theory and in the faith that something can be radiated from that is redemptive in character. And until we test that, how dare we set up our faith, whatever it may be, with arrogance and pride, and look with judgment upon the faith